I'm Philippa, CEO of Paradigm Norton, and this is Life Matters More, where we explore ESG, sustainability, and the future of business. Today's conversation is one I have been really looking forward to. Across the professional world, we talk a great deal about talent pipelines, diversity and access, but very few people actually reshape the system. Very few people take the barriers that have been baked into professions for decades and decades and decide quietly, tenaciously, and with real imagination to dismantle them. My guest today, Tom Lyas, is one of those people. Tom is the head of resourcing and social mobility at Browne Jacobson, where he has led one of the most ambitious and impactful social mobility programs in the UK legal sector. He is the architect behind FAIRE, the firm's award-winning initiative that has opened up real, meaningful work experience to tens of thousands of young people, many from communities that have historically been shut out of the professions altogether. Under his leadership, Browne Jacobson has become the #1 ranked employer in the Social Mobility Foundation Index, and Tom himself has been recognised across the industry, from the LexisNexis Legal Awards Personality of the Year to being named the O-shaped Trailblazer, and only this week, Leader of the Year for in-house at the British Recruitment Awards, which I am reliably informed is the Oscars of the recruitment world. He's given evidence in the House of Lords on how businesses can move from good intentions to genuine inclusion. What I find most compelling about Tom, though, isn't the accolades, as impressive as they are. It's the way he thinks about opportunity, fairness, and the quiet revolution happening in the professional services world. He brings a rare combination of operational rigour, strategic clarity, and deep humanity. He's living proof that cultures aren't built by slogans, but by structures, by redesigning the doors, not just widening them. So today we're going to talk about the why and the how. How do you create fair access at scale? What does real social mobility look like inside a firm? What can leaders in law, finance, and beyond learn from this work? Why does it matter, not just ethically, but economically and personally? Tom is generous, thoughtful, and quietly radical. I think you'll love this conversation. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I mean, what an introduction that is. I enjoyed hearing that myself and actually found it incredibly emotional. So thank you for your very kind words, Philippa, and absolutely delighted to speak to you today.
Fantastic. So, right, take us from the start. What sparked your passion for social mobility? Was there a moment in your career, in your life that has shaped your approach?
Yeah, it's something I've thought about a huge amount. Certainly over the last few years, as we've made good strides. There's plenty more work to do in social mobility, but we've certainly started that journey. I'm not from a lower socioeconomic background myself. My parents were physiotherapists and went to state school. So I think it's from my side. My first real kind of foray into social mobility is when I went to Tesco. So my background is as a recruiter, and it is lovely. Just 48 hours ago, having kind of recognition for circa 20 plus years of helping others and providing opportunities, and it is a very wholesome moment. But when I moved in-house for the first time, having been on the agency side of things, that's when I really started to understand a bit more around how interviews and hires in organisations were made. Obviously, from a recruitment agent perspective, where I first started, you'd put candidates forward and you wouldn't get a huge amount of feedback back. They'd either get the job or they wouldn't. So you didn't have a huge insight into what was happening. But when I started sitting with hiring managers in organisations like Tesco, and particularly at the junior levels, so graduates and interns, the very grassroots of the profession, I started to notice a little bit of a trend, which only years later do I understand for what it probably is. And I often use the word guilt. I still carry a little bit of guilt, which is unfair to myself, and it's probably unfair to others. As life progresses and you learn more, you understand, and educate yourself. So the amount of times that I'd sat in interviews with fantastic graduates, and you'd get down to the final two, and then you couldn't really make a decision. It was, they're both as good as each other. They can bring different things. But the phrase, let's go with this one because they're just a bit more polished, would come up time and time again. And now I fully understand what that phrase, they're a little bit more polished, can mean. Doesn't mean it always does. But this is perhaps somebody that's got a professional network that they could tap into. Their academic side of things may have taught them more about careers than somebody who went to a lower performing school, things like that. So that was probably the very first moment that I started to understand around, okay, is there something is there something different based on your background? At Tesco, things were done on such a size of scale. We'd be recruiting anywhere from 200, 300, 400 plus graduates, 200, 300, 400 plus interns, that you did start to see patterns. And I remember probably now, I would have thought early 2010, 11, 12, something like that, having a group of about 30 graduates come in, and they were fantastic. I mean, really good. But what I noticed is that they could all do, if you set them a task, they could either all do it really well, or actually they didn't all know how to start it. So there was a real difference. And I was like, I've now come to realize that's what's probably known as groupthink. And I suppose when you start to piece and sew everything together, I was like, at Tesco back in that period of time, the instructions were to go to the best universities, go for those with first class degrees, straight A grades at A level. So you're fishing in this incredibly small puddle, effectively, and ignoring the ocean of talent that exists, without sounding like a cliche, that comes from other places. And when I took the decision there, I said, actually, do you know what? Let's stop looking at grades. Let's start doing things a bit differently. The world just changed. The demographics of who was coming through from non-Russell Group universities, or from state school, or for those that had 2-1s, or even in some cases 2-2 degrees. And we started looking at what I suppose the best way to describe it is we started looking at talent in context rather than just what was on the CV. And for me, that was the game changer. That's what started the whole social mobility for me.
It's amazing. And so true, isn't it? And when you're having to make those quick decisions about things, you tend to go back to those shortcuts, and it's easy to say, let's go with the polished one. But as you say, no one's then asking the question, well, why are they more polished? What have they got, and what does that mean them? So that's fab. So, but you've worked across multiple sectors. You haven't always been in law firms, as you've just said.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not from a legal background. I guess my career, it started, I didn't go to university. So I had the opportunity to go and play cricket in South Africa, which any 18-year-old would sort of jump at. So I decided to do that and try and follow that route as opposed to progressing with academics. I think I achieved reasonable A-level grades. I enjoyed school, but I just think I'd had enough. So I did that. Retail and leisure was obviously what I needed to do, while doing cricket at the weekends and stuff. And then, my career has really spanned kind of industrial recruitment. And I do think, certainly with what's just happened, 48 hours ago, it does make you reflect back. My first foray into, the world of talent actually was trying to convince people to come and work a 45-hour week in a freezing cold factory for £21 more than they would get for doing a week on benefits at home. And you thought, well, why would you do that? And it actually really helped me understand that people are like, it's not about the money, it's about having a purpose. So that was industrial recruitment. I moved then into the sort of more real estate work. So I used to recruit architects, estate surveyors, acquisitions, engineers for big retail and leisure organisations, which is how I ended up at Tesco. I followed an incredibly talented individual from Tesco to Whitbread when they owned Costa, Premier Inn, and the Beefeater brands. And then my wife, who is from Bedfordshire, got a job at Boots, the Nottingham-based retailer. And it was at that point, it was like, do you want to go back home? And I thought we had 10 years in London. And I was like, do you know what? Yeah, I'd be up for this. So we came home, and it was at that point that I was offered the job at Browne Jacobson. And I had never had any dealings whatsoever with a lawyer. I'd never been in trouble. I hadn't bought a house. I hadn't had any reason. And then all of a sudden, I'm put in charge of recruiting, recruiting the lawyers, which coming into the legal profession was just so alien for me. But I have to say, it has been just, it'll be 10 years in June next year, June the 6th, 2026, if I make it that far. It's absolutely been the ride of my life.
That's so funny. I mean, I only ever worked in law firms, so it's so funny. Like, I've just sort of come out of working in a law firm, but they're sort of singular places. So what did you take with you then from your previous careers in sort of retail and leisure to professional services is kind of different?
Oh, 100% different. I mean, my first week kind of made me realize how different. Two things happened pretty much in my first week. Thereabouts. So it's a well told story, in certain circles now, certainly around social mobility. But it was so. I didn't. This sounds crazy. I didn't bat an eyelid walking in on even my first week. And we were starting to look at early careers, and I was like, take the academics off. We don't need. We used to ask for a 2-1, an A and 2 Bs at A level, and I was like, oh no, you don't need that. And obviously I'm strolling in, having seen 5 or 6 years worth of Tesco and Whitbread taking the academics off, and seeing quite a lot of magic happen as a result of it. But I had no idea how much the legal profession placed, I can't think of the right term, but the prowess placed on academic grades. So that's a story to tell. But also, at the time I was still umming and ahhing. I came back to Nottingham, and there was one job which would have kept me in London, and it was head of graduate recruitment at a mega firm, and I won't obviously say which, but it was in a probably what would be described as a magic circle. And I went through the interview process. I was absolutely up for it. And at the end, they said, look, we're going to go with someone else because you haven't got legal experience of the legal sector. And I was like, well, you knew that from my CV. We've had this conversation. Whether it was a bluff or not, I'll never know. And it's in the past now. But a week after starting at Browne Jacobson, either the other candidate might have declined. I've no idea. But I got a phone call and they said, oh, we can see you at a law firm. And I was like, yeah, it's great. And, I've been here 2 or 3 days and it's going well. And they asked the question, well, now you've got legal experience. Would you want to come out? And I was like, I literally have been here 4 days, 3 days. And I thought, at the time, I didn't think a huge amount, but I was like, there's something in this. And it's strange. Sorry, I'm slightly going off topic for you here, but I had a conversation in London on Wednesday about starting to look at, from a social mobility perspective, whether we can commission some research. My job is there isn't another person, I don't think, in this country that has the same job title as me, head of resourcing and social mobility. But what's so brilliant about it is, my team go out searching for talent. So we increase aspiration, we fill the hopper, we select everybody. We're responsible for the onboarding process to make sure that when we found great talent, we don't lose them. But what's really interesting for me is from a talent perspective, how much talent I think is lost for law firms, particularly not on the fee earning side, but maybe the central functions and kind of the office functions, through the phrase of hiring managers saying, "Oh, I really want someone that's got professional services or legal services experience." If Browne Jacobson had applied that to me, I wouldn't have been able to get in the front door. And a lot of the things we've done together, it's not all on me, there's a huge amount of people who do this stuff, would never have happened. And I'm sort of feeling on a bit of a mission to, as you said at the start, break that barrier down. People, to answer your question, people who are bringing other sector experience into professional services or into legal services world, you bring a totally different perspective. You said yourself at the start, Philippa, I mean, your career is phenomenal, and it's extremely broad, but law firms, they're almost victims of their own success, I think, at times, because I've never worked with so many people that have got 20, 30, 40. We even recently had someone who had 50 years service, and that's incredible. But it does mean that you are only really familiar with your own world. And law firms, if anything, if they do decide, well, what are other people doing, they tend to sort of peer over the fence at the neighbours, which are another law firm. And there's some brilliant stuff in law, of course there is. It's as I said, the ride of my life. But you have to have people coming in from other sectors that will bring different innovation, different perspectives to certain challenges. And I think Browne Jacobson, has been a forerunner in doing that.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. So I just want to go back to that moment. You walked in your first week. You said, "Oh no, we don't need any minimum grades or preferred universities or anything," which I have to say, as an ex-lawyer, blows my mind.
Yeah.
When did you realise that was an unusual thing to do, and what was the reaction?
Well, so everything in the early careers world takes about 2 years. So you make a decision, you take an action, and usually 2 years later, that's when somebody arrives. So, for example, they come to an assessment centre, you make an offer. They'll either finish their final year or previously would have gone off and then done a year's worth of GDL or LPC, and then they arrive at the firm. And the conversation was, it feels like it was yesterday, and I can recall it pretty much kind of word for word, or I believe I can. I had a call from a partner who said, my new graduates here, they're brilliant. But could you let me know what the mitigating circumstances are, because they've got a 2-2. And I was like, I don't think there are any. And I said, well, for a couple of years now, we've not had any grade requirements. I took them off. But let's focus on the first half of the conversation. They're brilliant. And that was it. It was like, oh, okay. Phone went down. 5 minutes later, my boss calls, and we're like, I've just had a really weird phone call. What have we done? Because I never asked, and I need to always be honest about this. I thought, having been hired to be the head of recruitment, well, I wasn't the head of recruitment, I was recruitment manager at the time. But given the remit of looking after recruitment, I assumed, like everywhere else, I could make these decisions in isolation. So anyway, my boss said, okay, you're going to have to explain this because they're concerned. I then was called to a board meeting. Our structure is slightly different now, but I was asked to go to a board meeting, and I think in the run up to that, people were kind of like, "You're very calm about this," and I was like, "Why wouldn't I be?" And actually going into that meeting, I didn't prepare a paper or anything like that, but there were 3 bullet points on this paper which answered the questions I believe they were going to ask me. And I think because there was only 3 bullet points, I think they're a bit like, again, are you taking the mickey? Where's the detail? Now, despite I can be a very jovial character and kind of pretty sort of chilled out with stuff, I will always, when it comes to data, I will absolutely go down the mine in a very, very commercial way. So I had built up enough of a reputation by this point, that people trusted me. And I went around 88 of the then 109 partners, and I asked them, I said, look, confidentially, completely anonymously, but I do need to know, what grade did you get at university? And I'd noticed this might be, I'm not suggesting for a second that I am absolutely factually correct on this one, but I noticed a very strong correlation where LinkedIn, if you have a first class degree, more often than not, it's splashed across the your achievements. For those who didn't get a first class degree, it tends to not be there. So anyway, I go into this board meeting with 3 points. The first one was, who are our most successful people? And to a T, it was partners. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Our partners are tremendous individuals. They've built up great businesses. They lead great teams. And I said, always remember what you've just said for the rest of the context of this conversation. The second point was then, okay, why do we ask for a 2-1 and an A and 2 Bs at A level, to apply for a graduate program? And it always comes back to the same thing, or it certainly did at the time, which is it's a sign of intelligence. And it's like, okay, well, there was so much more around the context of, if you're from a low income household, if you are born in an area of deprivation and the schools aren't great quality, if you go to a school where the average outcome might be an E and a D or a couple of Ds at A level, it's very unlikely you're going to come out and get an A and 2 Bs. And that's not your fault. So again, I argued the point on that. And then the final one, which kind of started my career really at Browne Jacobson, is when I revealed the result of having spoken to 88 of the 109 partners, is actually that 20% of our partners themselves, their words, our top talent, had a 2-2. And they wouldn't be able to apply for their own graduate program. And in what is an eye-catching story, there's a real hard message there, which is, if you don't have the right recruitment process, or you put a barrier in place that actually makes no difference to it cuts out the wrong people, that's talent that your business is going to lose, and it's ultimately profit you're going to lose. So what was interesting, some of the reasons, this takes this story just a touch further, is a lot of partners who are from a lower income background, our lower socioeconomic background, they've carried a bit of that through their careers, coming into a profession like the legal profession. And I've had a lot of very kind words said to myself and my team about, I can finally sort of breathe and talk about this openly, but they always said at the interview, people made the assumption. I went to Durham University, making that one up for anyone at Durham. I went to Durham University, and someone was, it's a great university. And then they never asked me the question, what classification did you get? So it's not that they lied and said they got something else, but they would never ask the question, simply because the assumption that institute meant you must have had great training. So it was interesting from that. And that's just a bit of a story for you, to show wrong recruitment process, barrier in place, you will miss talent.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe you should have been a lawyer, Tom. I mean, it was very, very well argued.
Maybe I've just spent too much time with them. So maybe it's rubbed off a little bit on me.
Oh, I love that. I mean, it's the shortcuts that we all take, isn't it, to try and get the job done rather than trying to get the best talent. And I love the fact that you are challenging the status quo around that. But we can't have this podcast without talking to you about your FAIRE program. How much of that fed into it? What is it? How did it come about? What makes it different to the traditional work experience schemes?
Yeah, do you know, even as you said that, my hairs have just randomly stood on end. FAIRE is just, it's amazing. So FAIRE was born out of, again, I'm quite a simple guy. I don't tend to kind of muddy the water too much. FAIRE was a program which was born out of me seeing so many things that I thought were unfair. It's as simple as that. It started back in, I think, around the concept came in around the tail end of 2018, start of 2019. I never used to, despite having responsibility for a lot of things, nobody owned work experience at our firm back then. And that's, we were a growing firm. When I joined, we were just 600 people. We'd double that number today. But when nobody owns something, it's like water. It will tend to just seep its way into lots of areas. So a partner rang up and said, I've just had the son of a corporate client arrive at reception. We've promised a couple of weeks work experience 3 months ago, forgotten about it. And of course, I'll give them a good experience, but can somebody please just take control of this? This is becoming disruptive. And we were getting so many requests, from clients and others, which is certainly was the norm, in the industry, to the extent that when I said, look, of course I'll put my hands up. I've made a career out of putting my hands up and taking other people's problems and trying to sort them out. That's for sure. I will always say yes where I can. But anyway, then looked at the data. And one thing we were surprisingly good at, given no one owned it, is we did have a spreadsheet which captured everything we'd done over 3 or 4 years. And I was amazed. I was amazed to see that a roughly 80 students, clients, children and stuff were coming into the firm each year. And I was like, that's a huge number. I was like, that's great. And then I looked and realized that 96% of them were partner or clients' children. And there was no opportunity. There was no opportunity for others. And I literally went to bed that night. I've still got the email. I'm a bit of a collector of moments that sort of mean something. So I keep, speech notes and stuff like this. But I still got the email that I wrote at 1:30 in the morning that night, shot up in bed, and I was like, do you know what? FAIRE. We need to create something called FAIRE.
Wow.
FAIRE, FAIRE. It stands for Fairer Access into Real Experience. The next morning by 9 o'clock, I was talking to the people director and Caroline Green, our senior partner. And I said, look, if we are serious about social mobility and being serious here, here's the issue. We need to create a dedicated program. It's going to be called FAIRE. 50% of the places on this will still give 80 places. They'll all be paid because not one person was being paid to do work experience. And we were cutting out loads of people who obviously couldn't afford to do work experience. But we'll ring fence 50% for people from lower socioeconomic background who've got no connection to the firm and have never had work experience. So we'll give them that opportunity and make it a more balanced approach. And that's where FAIRE was born from. Then, as we were starting to sort of roll it out, COVID hit, obviously, around 2020. And you have this kind of very rapid decision to make because no one on the planet had experienced something like this, and it was like, well, do you just pause it, do you stop it, or do you just go at it and try and make it work? I suspect even in the few minutes we've been speaking, you've probably understood that I was never going to stop something. I was always going to go at it. And it was like, right, okay, well, can we possibly deliver something like a virtual work experience for the first time? This is a world where, right now, Teams and Zoom feel almost old, but, in 2020, Zoom and Teams were like, what is this? Most people have never used it before. So we decided to try and put on a virtual work experience. Now, when we say virtual work experience, what the beauty of FAIRE is never, and I'm so grateful to the firm and its leaders, not once have I been asked to show a return on investment or any sort of business related return for doing this. They get that this is essential to the future of the profession, basically. So they allowed me to put on an event online, which not only talked about law firms, but we invited clients to speak or others to speak about the in-house side of things. We brought chambers in to talk about what's a barrister career. And basically it was kind of, let's create something, someone's described it very nicely as by all, for all, for the entire profession. You leave your ego at the door, whether you're, we've had people like Lady Hale speaking, we've had presidents of Law Society, some amazing people who give their time for free, to come and speak for the greater good. And I'll never forget, I'm sat at my kitchen table now, and I was sat there on this day when we first did it, and I thought, is anyone going to turn up, etc. I logged on to the team call, and I saw 7,120 students on that call, and almost all of them stuck with us for 2 days, simply because we were just trying to help them get access and understand and have a fair chance of getting into the profession. So what makes it so unique is that it's not just a sell for Browne Jacobson, it's about the entire profession, every facet. and we high five each other if somebody uses that experience to get a job at another law firm, if they use it to get the confidence to get into a university of their choice. And, you know, it's just been a phenomenal journey. I mean, we ran FAIRE, the big one, as it's now affectionately known, which is the virtual work experience. We've got FAIRE in-person work experience, which is what it says on the tin, about 80 individuals coming in for in-person work experience. But we ran another event 3 weeks ago, I think it was now, and another 5,500 turned up. 2,500 have since watched the recording because they were on school holidays. And since FAIRE launched, I know at the time that you and I had spoken, the number was big. We've actually now just had over 87,000 aspiring legal professionals come through our virtual events, through our online careers hub that we've built for free. And of those, we haven't got an exact number, but it's circa 4,500 have actually got a tangible outcome.
Wow.
So they've got into a university of choice, they've got a paralegal job, they've got a training contract, they've got a solicitor apprenticeship. This is not let's just, it's not a CSR thing. It's not just to talk about it and best of luck. There has to be tangible outputs from this stuff, or it's not worth doing. So that's what I think makes FAIRE different.
Wow, I am blown away. That is just incredible. Absolutely amazing. And it's free for all. Anyone can join.
Absolutely free. Absolutely free.
That's amazing. 87,000. I'm honestly, it's not very great for a podcast host, but I'm a bit speechless about that. That's brilliant. And do you get to meet any of these young people?
I mean, yes, of course. I mean, it is hard to comprehend. And like I say, I am really simple. I never really had a career plan. I follow the wind, or let the wind take me where it goes, whatever the phrase is. But one thing I'm absolutely passionate about is fairness. And coming into the legal profession, I saw so many things that were unfair, hence the name. But it is so nice to meet people, to hear the incredibly kind words of, what a difference you've made. You've filled me not only with aspiration, but also intention to go and do something. I mean, the statistics are incredibly strong. So you are 17 times more likely to be a lawyer if your parents are one. And I see on a daily basis why that is the case. And I just feel intrinsically bound to make sure that others who don't have that connection have their fair opportunity, because there's so much talent out there that the legal profession needs. The legal profession needs incredibly diverse perspectives and voices, and so you need representation of society as a whole. And to exclude any part of society, no matter what background that is, the profession will be worse for it.
Yeah.
So when I do meet individuals, of which there are people at the firm, people at other firms, it is a very, very wholesome moment.
Yes, yeah, and you've also introduced accent bias training. For your partners, alongside the sort of more usual socioeconomic sort of and diversity training. Talk to me a little bit about that accent bias training. Has anything surprised you about the outcome of that?
So the accent bias training, it's not an initiative. I'm certainly not going to take any credit for that. There are some tremendously talented people at the firm, and outside the firm, who've created that. So we did what's called a knowledge transfer partnership, for anyone who isn't aware. So a half kind of agreement where University of Nottingham would, it's a 3-year agreement between University of Nottingham and Browne Jacobson, to commission some research, and the shared funding, and we managed to get some grants and stuff like that. And we looked at a series of things across diversity, equity, inclusion. And one of those, obviously from a social mobility perspective, was around accent bias. So we partnered. It originally started with a partnership with the linguistics school. Victoria Howard, who currently works in my team, but at the time was at the University of Nottingham, and Professor Louise at the linguistics school at University of Nottingham. And we started putting job specs into, I call it the machine because I don't actually know what it's called, but some sort of technology where you can feed lots and lots of stuff in. And actually it told us, is the bias within our job specifications, are you likely to attract or, more likely, turn the lights out for certain demographics. And we started initially certainly looking at, female candidates. And it was the very strong words. So you need to be excellent. You need to be, this within our job specs that started to show there's a bit of bias. And I liken it to, as I've got older, 45 now, I keep finding myself using analogies, and I don't know why. Maybe it's just to keep it simple for me. So there's a lot of research out there and anecdotal comments as well about the difference between male female approaches to various talent related opportunities. So men will quite often read a job spec and think, okay, I can do 20% of that, I'll apply. Women will sometimes say, well, unless I can do 90% of it, I'm just not going to apply. I quite liken it as, my analogy is, it's kind of, men will quite often, if they went to IKEA, they'll get a set of drawers, they'll try and build it without reading the instructions, and then surprise, surprise, there's 5 pieces left over at the end, and you're like, oh, I should have probably done that in the first place. More often than not, and certainly my other half would read it intently and then only start when you're like, I'm really clear on this, and then it's perfectly built at the end, of course. And what we found is a lot of the language was putting off female applications, and so we had then a great session of making job specs more inclusive, and we saw a real uptick very quickly, in the applications. And then it, as I said, it then went a little bit further. We formally started the KTP, Knowledge Transfer Partnership, and the accent bias training was born out of, people are describing it as kind of, the last taboo, and very strong regional accents, not being welcome, or people feeling insecure if they've got a very strong regional accent in the law. I've heard a lot. We commissioned some research, and the findings were anonymous, but they were really quite shocking. Lots of people saying, I've been recommended to have elocution lessons, or you'd never succeed in the profession. People saying that, I can't put you in front of a client for the pitch because they might not understand your accent. I mean, genuinely, and you're talking, particularly the demographic seemed, there was a lot of spread, but very concentrated on the northeast, the northwest. Birmingham accent, was regularly something that came up, and of course that's crazy because that's part of who you are. You shouldn't have to change any facet of who you are to be successful or get an opportunity. But obviously, the darker side of, if you're not put onto the pitch team, if you're not part of, getting client-facing opportunities, we've seen that it can potentially harm your promotion and progression opportunity. And obviously, social mobility, which is always the lens through which I look, it's not just about getting in, it is absolutely about getting on. The worst thing you can do is create a lot of opportunity, leave somebody to it, and provide no organisation support. And then, you're surprised when your retention rate decreases because you haven't provided an environment. So I appreciate that. Sorry, that's a very long-winded answer. But, Louise and Victoria have created an amazing project. We have rolled the training out to all hiring, those that are related to the hiring process. We've also piloting it with this year's promotion panel, assessors to make sure that they're aware of its accent bias and socioeconomic awareness. And it's fascinating. So one last thing on this is this was not a Browne Jacobson piece of research, but it's for your readers, for your listeners. There's an article out there. If you Google accent bias, it'll come up straight away. If you accent bias legal, and what was interesting is there was a process. Can't think of the word, like an experiment basically, and they gave 60 interviewers written responses to interview questions, and then they gave 60 assessors verbal recordings of the same answers to the same questions. And who got the job based on the written response, which was identical to the verbal response, was completely different, simply based on the sound of the voice, as opposed to, because it was the same words just said with an accent.
Yeah. I mean, all of those cognitive biases that we forget that we have, or we don't know that we've got, that make it hard for people who aren't of a certain type to get on the world. I just think it's amazing. Sounds to me like you have done quite a lot to change the culture in the law firm. Talk to me about culture change and how you measure success. What do you even measure when you're looking at this kind of thing?
Yeah, it's again, and that's it evolves. So you have to have some sort of baseline to know, well, are we making a difference? And I think what's different about there are some hard metrics and some very soft metrics. So your hard metrics will be, okay, in terms of who's applying to your roles, the demographic of those, who's getting through which stages of the recruitment process, both at junior levels and obviously experienced hires, who's hired, who's performing, who stays. They're kind of your really hard measures. And then you've got some slightly softer stuff, which is harder to measure, but you have to. It's critically important. I sit within the people team, the people department. Absolutely tremendous group of individuals. Very much enablers as opposed to kind of HR policing. It's really trying to help support the firm. We've got an engagement function, and what they do, once a year, might be twice a year. Sorry, but they send out an engagement survey, and within the engagement survey are questions around, do you feel your background has ever held you back? Have you ever had to mask any part of your identity to feel to fit in or to get on? And obviously there's a numerical, I strongly disagree, I strongly agree, or anything in between. But obviously regularly doing surveys like that, it's critical to know, well, have we stayed the same? Have we moved forward? Have we gone backwards? And they're the sort of questions that we would measure and take interest in. I think I was at the UK Model Diversity Survey on Monday, just gone, and that's a huge survey done professional services, law firms, and others. And what feedback we get quite regularly is the level of disclosure rate. So we're well into the 90s, which 70 is kind of if you're getting 70% of your workforce disclosing their information, then they're engaged and believe that what you're doing is genuine. It will be listened to. It will be actioned on. And I think for us, it's an incredible achievement to be in the 90s, and that itself shows that people are engaged and willing to give us their very, very personal viewpoint and data because they trust and see action. And I think that alone, disclosure rates are really, for me, the absolute number one metric in measuring culture. Because if you're not telling you what they think, it tells you everything about what they think.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever read Culture Shock by Gallup, but they talk about engagement rates and how they've got statistics around how it shows up in the amount of mistakes people make, the amount of sickness they take, how much they care for their clients, all that kind of thing. I couldn't agree with you more that actually having engaged people isn't just about having happy people. It's about having a successful firm where
Oh,
inside it really care about
100%.
what they're doing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, somebody told me a really good story. I hope it's true. I wasn't there, but there is no reason at all for me to believe this person would tell me a lie. Um, I better not say the company just on the chance that it isn't right. But this is a perfect example of a culture where everybody is pulling together. So they describe this luxury car retailer or manufacturer, sorry, British-based luxury car manufacturer. And they said that they have this big red button. Okay. Um, and basically, this car, as it gets manufactured, everyone's got a job. They're all doing their part and collectively adding up to this beautiful machine coming off the end of the production line. If you make one mistake, you're meant to press the button and the whole factory shuts down.
Oh, wow.
And obviously, then production stalls. And apparently, they've got 100% success rate of if I make a mistake, they've hit the button because they know if they try and hide their little mistake, it will absolutely be picked up. And then everybody has to, it's twice as disruptive.
Yeah.
But they've created a culture where it's absolutely okay to say, do you know what? I'm so sorry. Yeah, I've just made a mistake. Sort it. Everybody goes on. That is amazing. To feel confident enough to do in front of everyone, say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I've made a mistake." But to have 100% people genuinely doing it and knowing that if they, it's okay to make those mistakes.
Yeah.
That was such a lovely. I loved hearing that.
Yeah.
When somebody told me, I hope it's true.
Yeah. We all need a big red button, don't we? That people are happy to press. I couldn't.
I don't know how many in law firms would press it. It'd be amazing to hit to experiment. Maybe we're going to get one in reception.
Yeah.
So like big red button.
All right. So let's move on from FAIRE and culture and talk about Reach, which is another one of your initiatives. What is it? Why did you create it? And talk to us a bit about it.
Yeah. So Reach. Like I said, so Reach, it's not my personal one. This is very much the brainchild of a phenomenal partner of ours, Bridget Tatham. She's our race executive sponsor. Reach itself is race, ethnicity, and cultural heritage. A quite widely used acronym for race and ethnicity related cultural celebration. And it's, again, everything that we do is data led. And if I link the two, so recruitment and FAIRE and the removal of grades and everything, if I sort of bring it back into, the metrics that we started to see post 2016, you remove the academics. 1 year later, 45% of the candidates who got training contract offers were actually candidates that, if we still asked for a 2-1 and an A and 2B, wouldn't have actually got been able to apply, let alone get the job. But we started to see this trend. I guess you'd probably call it intersectionality these days, where each year our demographic, which at the time was just in 2016, our junior lawyer population was 7% Black, Asian, UK ethnic minority. It was 100% from Russell Group University, 11% from lower socioeconomic background. So that's our kind of starting point. Like I said, remove the grades and things start to progress. And we started to see that 7% Black, Asian, UK ethnic minority start to creep up. I think it jumped up in the first year from 7% to 19%, and it went to 24%, then it went to 27 or 29%. So we were like, okay, there's something in this as we're focused on social mobility, as we remove grades, and we're taking people in context to their background, their achievements in context to their background. We're seeing an increase in ethnic minority representation. But what was by 2019, probably by 2020, what we noticed is that while the overall percentage of Black, Asian, UK ethnic minority was increasing, the Black parts, the Black individuals, were just not making any difference. And up until I think it was 2022, because that's when Bridget, with support from myself, plenty of others, external individual now called Gavin, we'd hired, I think, one Black trainee in 5 years. And that's not representative, certainly, of what the demographic is within UK law schools, and most certainly not representative of the demographic within the UK population. And at that point, you're kind of like, right, well, the only option that we have is proper, targeted, specific initiative. And that's where Bridget, her brainchild, Reach came from, this Reach mentoring program. So we supported Bridget by putting together a really structured 6-month program. It included paid work experience, and it was just phenomenal. So there was hesitancy in various parts of the firm, and we called it a pilot. Bridget and I called it a pilot because then it just allows you to kind of be like, let's try this, before we sort of fully commit. We always need and want to be very intentional with our actions. So we tried this pilot, and it was amazing. In the first year, 54% of the 12, maybe it was 30, sorry, forgive me, I'm casting my mind back. It was either 12 or 13, I think it was 13 individuals, but we ended up with a 54% success rate of people coming off the program, and then either securing some of vacation programs, which then led to training contracts, or being offered a training contract outright. And these were just incredibly talented individuals, and many of those are still with us, obviously, today. We learned a huge amount in that first year about the structure, about what we needed to really focus on in terms of the skills, the behaviours, the actual interventions and the content of the programme. And then in the second year's pilot, we actually got up to 75% success rate, again, with a tangible outcome. The very clear difference between FAIRE and Reach is that Reach, well, FAIRE is for the greater good. Mm-hmm. And as I said, there's no return on that investment. It simply is for the profession. Reach couldn't be further from that. It is a very, very clear recruitment pipeline. And then in terms of our training contracts, so our training cohorts, like I said, we had, I'm so sorry, I'm casting my mind back. I think we went from about 3 or 4% of our trainee cohort being Black to 29% in the first year. And then in the second year, it went to 34%. And that is a size, I mean, it sounds seismic, but you are talking about maybe 3 or 4 people, because our population is only about 20. So it's a higher percentage than it is a number. But when you put that in context, we hired one Black trainee in 5 years. And then with a really structured program, all of a sudden you have a far better pipeline of genuinely talented individuals. This isn't there are no shortcuts here. This is not a kind of tokenistic program. This is an absolute, if anything, they had to perform even more strongly because we were so acutely aware of, if we get this wrong, and talent comes in that isn't up to standard, will be, the impact of that could be quite catastrophic. So actually, those who came through probably had it even harder and deserved it even more. And that program has gone from strength to strength. We're into year 4 now, I think. it's been embraced by the profession. Our clients are now involved in it, because what we also want to do is help, as the number has grown to about 20 mentees, of course, there aren't 20 opportunities just at Browne Jacobson. And what we need is partners who can bring opportunity. They bring mentors, but they also bring opportunity. So we've got, a couple of fantastic clients involved, and their teams provide a totally different point of view because they're in-house. But there are Reach mentees that aspire to be barristers, and there are Reach mentees that aspire to be in-house. And we have a duty to try and help them get to that career as well. So it's evolving. It's tremendous. Shout out to Bridget. She's, I think, now a multi-award winner, herself for that program, and rightly so. And I have to say, our firm quite literally would not look the same if it wasn't for initiatives like Reach.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? Another massive success story. So is it just shining a light on this stuff? Is it what was missing from the sort of approach of your sort of applicants, that you were able, because you've been able to move this well pretty quickly?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of, I always have to remind myself, and I had to remind a few others on Monday at a panel that I did. You have to remember, the scale of your own organisation, and Browne Jacobson, in the grand scheme of things, it's a brilliant firm. It's incredibly successful, but we are still quite small. We're 1,300 people. That's double what we were just say 8-9 years ago. But also that the size of our business allows us to be very agile when it comes to making decisions. And I know Richard Meds, our managing partner, he and Caroline Green, our senior partner, they make life so easy for stuff like this because they get it. They allow and trust us to say, whether it's me, whether it's Ollie, our head of diversity inclusion, Shelley, the chief people officer, they allow you to go and say, I know that this will make a difference, so we'll allow you to do it. But I just think, there are some very clear, in the recruitment process, there is significant adverse impact. Particularly, there's a lot of research on adverse impacts on things like online testing, psychometrics, against the junior black lawyers. There is absolutely research out there, so I'm not saying anything that's not true there. And again, after 20 plus years being around this stuff in recruitment, I know that there's a lot of early careers teams that will have processes in place that aren't to select the right candidates. They're processes that will take a huge volume of applications. Some firms get 10,000 applications and they might have 100 jobs, and you're kind of like, literally, how do we get 99% of the pool out of it? Yeah. Because only 1% is going to get the job. But the danger with that is that it's putting a tool in place that is fundamentally biased towards certain demographics. So our job has been to unpick that process, to assess individuals in a way that doesn't give them an advantage, but it certainly removes the disadvantage. Otherwise, it's an unfair process, right? Because the tool itself is biased for a certain population. So these are talented individuals, but I think that's an element of what's stopped people getting into profession. And then you've got a clear lack of visual role models for these individuals. The profession is brilliantly more diverse today than it was when we started looking at this stuff, and that's amazing. And there's so much more to do. But the classic, if you can't be it, you can't see it. Quite often, I speak to aspiring professionals on campus or on various platforms, and without, they just lacked initially a belief that they could actually welcome and could find a place there, because they just struggled to find visual role models for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I've never even had a female boss of any background.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it's astonishing, isn't it? How that plays into what you believe you can do.
And I was going to say, if you think about social mobility, social mobility is an incredibly complex subject, but in its simplest term, it's about somebody doing better than their parents.
Yeah.
That's effectively that's it, and moving from a lower socioeconomic background to an intermediate, or an intermediate to a professional. And again, this is where I think the simplicity of this comes. If you don't have a role model, whether that's a parent, a guardian, a teacher, a friend, a contact, whatever it is, or even potentially in your case, a female leader, boss, where do you have to figure it out yourself? And that's twice as hard as having somebody or a network around you that can help you. And that's where the advantage of a professional background comes in. If your parents are like, I can prepare you for this interview, or I can get you some work experience, or I've been there, I know what you're experiencing, this is how you might deal with it. Having to figure stuff out on your own is really difficult. You'll have experienced that, like I said, if you've not had a female boss from a certain angle. Black individuals, will see that if they don't see black lawyers, lower socioeconomic background, working class, will say, I just can't see myself there, or I can't, in accent biases way, I can't hear myself in those rooms.
Yeah.
Do I belong?
Yeah, so powerful. Okay, so there may be people listening who are thinking, this Tom is incredibly inspiring. I want to do some stuff like this. What advice would you give firms looking to start a mentoring program, and just look at doing stuff differently?
I mean, just do it. I know, and I'm not a slogan for Nike, but I mean, literally, you will learn more, 100 times more, by taking that first step, doing it, and learning as you go. Than again, one thing I have learned, without getting absolutely shot at here, one thing I have learned of spending nearly a decade around lawyers now is, do like to talk about stuff, do like to plan stuff, do like to make sure that every angle is covered before you take that first step. And actually, I've seen people talk themselves out of stuff. Ian Blatherwick, who was managing partner prior to Richard took over at the almost crazy time of May 2020. But Ian Blatherwick, when he talks about me removing the academic grades, he said, thank goodness you didn't ask, because we'd have absolutely talked you out of it. So I think that tells you, for me, take the first step. There is a lot more collaboration out there than I think sometimes people think. I mean, without trying to cause myself an astronomical amount of work, if anyone's interested, come and ask me. I will openly tell you and support you. Where I get my energy, where my team and I believe the firm gets their energy, is helping shape an industry or a profession. We're greedy, for some, which is a nice thing in this way, in this circumstance. We don't just want to change the four walls of Browne Jacobson. We want to help society as a whole. So, lots of collaboration opportunities out there, lots of open, free support, certainly from myself. If you want to look a bit wider, certainly on social mobility, the Social Mobility Foundation, the Social Mobility Commission, they have, and Progress Together is another a charity out there. They have so many free toolkits of how to do these things, step by step, templates, all the things that can be difficult and time consuming resource wise to set up. They provide all of these things for free. So there's 3 great examples. But it would be, I am not going to get to the end of my career and have a single regret about, I didn't share this, I didn't share that. If I do that, I genuinely think I've failed.
Well, I don't think anyone can say you failed, Tom. I think what you've done is amazing. All right, so you've spoken about social mobility. Let's let's spend the last few minutes talking about social mobility. I know you've spoken to the House of Lords, been advocating around having socioeconomic backgrounds as a protected characteristic.
Yep.
I mean, is government and the regulators moving fast enough on this stuff? What difference would that even make to people?
I mean, it's interesting. I actually got an email last week, and I do still need to go back to it. There's an MP's drop-in session on that exact topic taking place at the start of December, and it's going to be fascinating to sort of hear from MPs about making class a protected characteristic, and it's something that I mean it would change the game incredibly, and I'm still I am not an academic researcher on the topic of social mobility. There are plenty of people out there, and the language can be so complex that you've actually lost kind of what it is. But obviously, at the moment, the way that class is effectively defined, is lower socioeconomic background, intermediate, and professional. And the way that you are categorized into that is, okay, roughly at the age of 14, what was the main household income earner's job? And there are job categories. Those categories feel very dated at the moment. For example, in a world where you've got influencers and online, kind of gig economy, where does that role fit in? So it's very difficult to say, the government are making the right noise that they are going to do it. I believe, from everything I've been told, by the end of this parliament, they intend to do it. I don't follow politics that closely. And it's quite hard to ever get a clear answer from a politician, as I'm sure you know. But I think if they do decide to do it, it will be a great thing. It will be a great thing. Where it would go to and what would be required, just to even put in place, well, how do you categorize somebody into, into something that, that would be an astronomical debate. But I'm just grateful the conversation's even being had. 10 years ago, and even today, there are people who don't even think social mobility is a thing. They don't. They're like, this is just something made up. And it's, there's always going to be a difference of opinion. There's always going to be a different of what is and isn't a priority. I genuinely believe if socioeconomic background is made the 10th protected characteristic, it will absolutely change the game and properly level up, the opportunities that are out there.
All right, let's finish up with a couple of quick fire questions. If you had a magic wand and you could make one systemic change across the professional world tomorrow, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good one. I think my natural, the thing that comes straight away to my mind is to stop asking at all levels, and I mean all levels, stop asking for experience of, you have to have worked in this sector. It's so limiting. There's so much amazing talent with such a different voice and an opinion to bring that would enhance your businesses. I think if you've got recruitment processes or interviews are geared towards, I want you to have had legal or professional services experience, I'd love that to be banned.
And on social mobility, what's the one thing you would ask professional services firms to do differently?
I mean, it would be too easy to say, take all your grades off. The thing is, it's so easy to do. I don't understand why you wouldn't. I would love to see that happen. Just go on and see the potential in somebody, not the polish. Yeah. For me, if you do that, it will change the game for you, for your clients, and for the industry.
And a last question: to all the young people out there who might be listening, who might think that a career in law or finance or professional services of any sort isn't an option for them, what advice would you give them?
Do you know what? I would take your time, is what I would say to them. I mean, I recently had surgery on my back, and it was the first time in circa 20 plus years that I'd had quite a significant chunk of time out. And I live my life at work. Everything is thrown at you at 100 miles an hour, and you cope the best you can and you do the best you can. But what was a shock for me was, I almost, in those 4-5 weeks that I was off, I became absolutely addicted to social media on my phone, and I couldn't believe, even with my experience, my comfort at being able to do what I can do. I started to feel like I was like, I'm losing ground here. I need to get back to work.
Wow.
Social media is telling me, this is what success looks like. This is this. It was absolutely mind consuming. And I can only imagine for those young aspiring professionals out there who are, significantly involved in the social channels, you've got to try and understand that that isn't real life. It puts a huge pressure on you to define what success looks like or achievement. So for me, my absolute piece of advice is take your time. You're going to have to work for a lot of years, and you've got to find somewhere that you're going to enjoy. It's going to support you. But this legal profession, the professional service profession, is for everybody. There is a place for you. Don't sell yourself short simply to get a foot in the door. Take your time and be comfortable saying no to potentially some offers if you do not feel like that is a place in which you can flourish.
Excellent advice, Tom. Thank you so much for joining me today. I knew it would be a brilliant conversation, and it really has been.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, Philippa.
Oh, it's been a joy. I mean, just hearing about the incredible work you're doing, and also your thinking and, frankly, your courage behind it has been just so inspiring for me. I think you've shown us that the changing the face of a profession isn't about small tweaks around the edges. It's about challenging assumptions, reimagining systems, and measuring progress with honesty and ambition. And whether it's creating pathways for students who've never stepped inside a law firm before or pushing for policy changes at the highest level, you've proven that social mobility isn't just a side project. It can be a core part of a firm's identity and the impact. So to our listeners, if you're in a position to open the door for someone else, this conversation is your invitation to do it with intention and with generosity, because when opportunity is fair, everyone rises. Thank you for listening. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please do share it with a colleague or a friend who cares about the future of our professions and the role we are all making, all playing in making money a force for good. Until next time, keep asking good questions and keep up doing the good work. Thanks again, Tom. It has been a real pleasure.